Welcome to Life on Purpose, a weekly deep dive conversation about being deliberate in all areas of your life, from the work that you do to your health and habits, your relationships, or even just making the planet a better place. It's all about being self-aware, deliberate, and conscious each and every day. In conversations with personal development leaders, thought leaders, and inspirational people from all around the world, we'll discuss concrete examples, tools, and takeaways for you to apply to your own life. Welcome to Life on Purpose. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Life on Purpose. I'm your host, Greg Berg, and I'm very happy to have you with us today. I want to welcome all of my new listeners, and I'm really happy to welcome some of my old audience from Radio Enzo, my old show which aired from 2011 to last fall. I also want to thank everybody who's listened and left a rating or review in iTunes, as the show has spent the past few weeks in iTunes' new and noteworthy category. Very honored to be in that company. And finally, a reminder to check out the brand new Life on Purpose website at lifeonpurposeshow.com, where you can find episode summaries, information about other episodes and the show itself, links to past episodes, and much, much more. I'd love for you to check that out. Now, my guest today, she's a writer, speaker, teacher, facilitator, and the best-selling author of Why Bother? Because Self-Help is Never Stupid. Weaving over 80 songs with the messages in the book, she shows how connecting with music and lyrics gives voice to those who have not yet found theirs. Interspersed throughout the book, she offers ways that you can begin to change your perception that will guide you towards peace, renewed passion for life, and joy. She herself has stepped through the looking glass of dysfunction and sexual abuse to discover that we can all discover an end to suffering. Over 20 years of practicing what she calls heart-centered consciousness has helped her aid others in seeing their situations in a new light. We're going to talk all about what that means. And currently, she's in the process of developing several workshops, including the Heart Pillar, which was introduced in her new book, and it's a powerful tool for creating a pillar of personal empowerment and overriding past hurts. We're going to talk all about that and the book today. Joining me via Skype from Scottsdale, Arizona, it's Martha Dusage. Martha, welcome to Life on Purpose.
Hi, Greg, and I'm very excited to be here with you.
Yes, very excited to have this conversation today. I want to give people a little background on Martha and why I'm having her here on the show. First of all, in full transparency, Martha and I were both members of a fantastic class recently put on by our mutual friend, Christopher Carter. And Your Signature Impact was the name of the class. And I got to know a little bit about Martha and the work that she was doing, and I was very intrigued. And she approached me about coming on and having a conversation about a topic that it's something that a lot of people don't talk about. It's a conversation that it's at times difficult, and so people tend to shy away from it. And I thought it was important to have this conversation because I believe that we can't fully live our life on purpose, the title of this show, if we don't deal with things like wounds from our past. And so that's a really crucial concept that we're going to talk about today, and we're going to include some concrete steps that people can take towards heading in that direction. We're going to talk all about how to do that. And I'm also excited as a musician, as a creative, and I'm very intrigued by this notion of you weaving 80 songs with messages throughout the book. And we're going to talk all about why you did that and how that's integral to the work that you do, Martha.
That sounds really good. It is very integral to the work, and honestly, it just kind of happened. When I started writing the book, it was not my intent. I was working with somebody to help enhance the creative writing to come out of me, and they had me listening to this music track over and over again, and it ended up being annoying to me. So I would turn on Pandora, and what happened was Pandora would not let me down. Whatever I was writing about, a song would come on that pertained directly to what I was writing about. So it was something that just kind of happened organically, but to me, it was really divine intervention as well. So
I love when that happens. I love when the universe becomes your own little radio station, which sounds like what happened to you.
It is what happened, and that's part of what happens when we practice what I call heart-centered consciousness. But beyond the heart-centered consciousness, it's the integration of the mind, body, spirit.
Yeah. So Martha, let's start off with some vernacular. Let's set the table here for listeners who are wondering, what does that term mean? Heart-centered consciousness. What do you mean by that?
We have been conditioned to intellectualize a lot. We get caught up in the thinking portion of our brain. So the idea is when we learn to step back a bit from that thinking brain and get more into our bodies, because we'll get onto my soapbox about abuse, but abuse has a tendency to take us somewhat out of body. When you get into survival mode, you're in a pure survival mode. So you're kind of not, to stay in survival mode, you're not necessarily aware of everything that's going on. It's a protective mode.
Right.
So when you learn about being heart-centered, there are actually techniques that you can learn to, especially with breathing and some other things that you can do to get yourself more grounded and focused. And when you get more grounded and when you get more focused and you start to pay attention to what's in the heart, the answers in the heart center, rather than the answers from the brain, and you start to operate on a more that heart-centered basis, we all start to heal more and we come up with our own answers. We find out that what we've been taught all along about how all our answers are inside of us, when we tap into the heart center and practice that, we realize the truth of that and the answers start to come.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, I'm a yogi myself. I've been practicing Kundalini yoga for a bit over 7 years now, and we do a lot of work with the heart and opening up your heart and heart consciousness in Kundalini yoga. So that definitely resonates. All of what you say resonates with me as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Good.
And so you say in the description of the book, when describing what the book is, you say, "Why Bother" was written to encourage you to find a deeper knowing, awareness, and appreciation for why it's important to bother, hence the title of the book. You say, "We live in a mad, pissed off world, and we all want ways to step beyond just coping and into moments of peace, joy, and contentment." I love that.
There's, a lot of times when we've suffered from some sort of, it doesn't necessarily have to be a deep trauma. There's many, many, many various levels of trauma. But oftentimes we allow things that happen to us, things from our past, to keep us stuck. And how many times have you heard people say, "Why bother?"
Right.
I'm sure you've heard, people say that. And I like to take questions and flip them, since we live in duality. And since I've really started to ponder the idea of duality, I like to take things and flip the question and look at the opposite side of the spectrum. And the whole idea of embracing the full spectrum was given to me in a channel reading many, many years ago. But, I believe there are 5 things that we are all seeking. And those 5 things that I say that we're all seeking are peace, love, fulfillment, freedom, and joy. And there are certain elements that get in our path to block that. One of the things we want to recognize is that we are spiritual beings having human experiences, not human beings having spiritual experiences. Since we're here to have those experiences, there are things that block our path to find, that freedom, peace, fulfillment, etc. And those things are shame, blame, guilt, denial, anger, judgment, rejection, and sadness. So, those are the things that are on the opposite end of the spectrum. And especially with abuse, that's my big soapbox. I was really excited to listen to your show a little while back with Bernie Siegel.
Yeah,
because
that was a treat.
I heard it was, and I'll tell you, I would love to have a conversation with that man someday, because I have not heard anybody else of his caliber make this statement about abuse. And that was that on the other side of love was not hate, but on the other side of love was indifference and abuse. And my big soapbox is the idea that there are so many forms of abuse. 24% of the population now claims to have been sexually abused before the age of 18.
Yeah, that's a staggering. That's a staggering statistic. That's a quarter of our population.
That's a quarter of our population claims to have been sexually abused before the age of 18, and that's just sexual abuse. Abuse, especially sexual abuse, is something that has been silenced for so long. It's an uncomfortable subject for people to talk about. They glaze over. I mean, I see it a lot, because I'm working with it. I'd break through it myself, and then, working with other people that have been, abused, or just talking about the topic in general, people tend to glaze over and they want to change the subject. But we can't change it unless we start to bring it out and bring more awareness to the topic.
Yeah.
But beyond that is the fact that if 24% of the population claims to have been sexually abused before the 18, you add into that the other kinds of abuse, the physical abuse, the verbal and emotional abuse, which has many layers, because then there, it adds in the narcissistic type abuse. There's, domestic violence, there's other kinds of child abuse, there's elder abuse, there's religious abuse, financial abuse, and abuses turn into other types of abuse, oftentimes to ease the pain. That's, a lot of people who suffer from drug and alcohol abuse have suffered from some other kind of abuse because they're trying to, lessen that pain.
Yeah, they're interrelated.
So, they are interrelated. So, but if you take that 24% on sexual abuse and think about all the other types of abuse that exist in our world, it's hard to fathom that, every one of us hasn't been affected by abuse in some way, shape, or form. And that, abuse, to me, abuse is really the number one problem in our society that we need to deal with in order for us to really evolve into becoming more human.
Yeah. And so Martha, obviously this begs the question, well, a few questions right now at this stage of our discussion. But first of all, how do we move from victimization? How do we move from being a victim, being in that space of some people that are going to recognize and acknowledge that they've suffered abuse at some form? They don't even know where to start. Maybe they're in the middle of it still, or they've just come off of this. Where do they go? What do they do? And that's obviously a huge question. And then how do they move from victimization and victimhood up to something at a higher level? How do they move forward from that?
There's going to be many, many stages, and it is not a simple journey by any way, shape, or form. It's not something you're going to go to counseling for just once and expect to get over it. And I highly recommend multiple forms of support, getting multiple forms of help, both conventional and alternative. What I will say for myself is that it's the alternative forms of practice that, meaning the heart-centered consciousness and studies on awareness and things like neurolinguistic programming, and that have had the most profound effect on my ability to transform it.
Yeah.
It's challenging because of the fact that abuse has been in our history for so very long, and it is a generational thing, and it's a conditioned thing. We are conditioned to it, and because it's so natural to some people, because it appears, even though it's not normal, it's something familiar. So when something is familiar, it becomes normal. And a lot of people who have been abused don't even recognize what happened to them as abusive. And it's not funny in any way, shape, or form, but every time I see that now, I kind of get a little chuckle inside because I've gone through that. Like, I didn't recognize the abuse myself. So the only reason why I feel that little bit of happiness inside is because I see people who are beginning to recognize that they were abused. Therefore, that's finally broken the ice for them to take that step towards healing.
Yeah, and self-awareness is the pillar of this show. Every episode I've had here on Life on Purpose, every episode I had at my previous show at Radio Enzo, at the core of the conversations we were having, as far as people wanting to move forward with their lives, self-awareness is the bedrock. You have to be self-aware first. You have to recognize your own traits, your own patterns, the things you've been through in your life, the challenges that you faced in order to move forward and create a plan and have strategies and tools for moving ahead. You first have to be self-aware. And so what are some things, some concrete things people can do if they're thinking, okay, well, I was in this situation, but I don't know, is that really considered abuse? But maybe it is. I don't know. What do you recommend to people as far as honing their self-awareness in that regard?
That has to do with really finding a sounding board, starting with a sounding board, whether that's counseling or a friend or whatever. I do start my workshop with the whole idea of exercises on attention and awareness, like just playing like little games on attention and awareness. I myself, when I started to wake up from the whole idea of abuse in my 30s, the first person that ever came into my life that I trusted enough, because trust is a really big issue. So for anybody who suffered any kind of abuse, they have to start with finding someone that they can trust to talk to about it. So when I finally found somebody that I trusted enough to tell what happened, tell my story to, she said, "You understand that's abuse, right?" And I kind of took a step back and a deep breath for a second. And I didn't answer right away because I didn't really recognize it as abusive. So one of the things is creating the awareness
Right.
of abuse, really getting the word out there, and you're seeing it more and more and more coming into the spotlight, which is a really good thing, because again, it's the only way that we're going to be able to bring it to a conclusion. Another thing that I talk about, or I have a whole chapter dedicated to know thyself, which is really an ancient philosophy.
Yes, and Theos.
And yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things that throughout history we've been driven towards, and then we step back and driven towards and step back. And so none of the information is really new, but as we really start to go back and look at some of those ancient ideas, and bring them back into our culture, like getting to know the ego. It seems to me, at least from my upbringing, that ego was something that you only looked at from the perspective of like a big ego. We didn't really look at the opposite side of the spectrum with the wounded ego as much. And I think we're starting to really pay a little bit more attention to the wounded side of the ego. And there was a time period, it seemed like, where a lot of people, it was popular to wrong the ego and talk about letting go of the ego.
As if it was something you could just sort of cut off and it would go away.
Yeah, and we can't do that. So I talk about embracing the ego and looking at the ego as being like part of our wounded inner child. Because if any of us who are parents, or if we pay attention to how we felt as children, if we go back there, you don't want to be dismissed, and nothing, it just creates more problems when it's dismissed. So if we start to learn to embrace the ego and the feeling side of things, and that's part of the heart-centered consciousness, is learning the difference between feelings and emotions, because they are two totally different things.
So I'm going to pause you for a second. Then,
yeah.
What is the difference then between feelings and emotions?
Emotions are when you're caught up in some trauma from the past, and you have an emotional charge on it, like it affects you deeply on a deep level. Or it can just be a low level disturbance. It's something that is constantly nagging at you. So there's also the different various spectrum on the emotional scale.
Right.
There is a spectrum and a scale to emotions. But the emotions are what hold us hostage. Where feelings, when you get into that heart center, that's when feeling becomes a more innate knowing, and again, it's something that you really have to practice and have somebody walk you through some processing till you can get yourself to that point where you know what feeling is, because unless you experience it, you don't really know it.
Yeah.
So it's all about, heart-centered consciousness has a lot to do with that experiential knowing, more so than the intellectual knowing of what we've been taught and conditioned to believe. So it ties into that whole idea of the letting go of limiting beliefs and recognizing that we came here to have human experiences, but there is a limitless potential and there is limitless possibilities, and that we are absolutely, without a doubt, worthy of experiencing more positive, having more positive experiences, more profound experiences in our lives. And that heart-centered consciousness leads you to more profound experiences.
Yeah. Well, you were talking about the ego. You had a great blog post recently. It said, "Get to know your." Yeah, it's titled "Get to Know Your Ego. It will help you if you let it."
Mm,
And you said, in comprehending the difference between when circumstances are outside of self and when they are inside of self, the ego can be our ally. When we start to understand our own ego, we can look at the reactions of others differently. We can begin to respond to someone else's ego from a place of merciful sorry and joy.
right.
Yeah, I love that. And that ties in with
Thank you.
I'm a big fan of Eckhart Tolle. And he writes about the pain body, and it's a similar view of looking at when someone's reacting at you in a way that you normally, in a habitual way, might have just responded on autopilot. You might have sort of struck back. I mean, or you're being attacked energetically, either verbally or in a physical way, and our conditioned response is just to respond without pausing, without thinking, without trying to step back and realize, like, this is not the true core of who this person is. They're reacting because of some hurt, some part of their ego, whatever. And I think that what you're saying ties in with that as well.
It absolutely does. And there's another quote that I absolutely love. And I would love to do a workshop for people just on learning how to listen. Listen to that inner voice. We can do that with meditation, but there there are some other things that we can do with breath work and stillness and just some things that we can really talk about to help us get to that point of stillness where we can listen. But a quote that I heard that I absolutely love is one that says, "We listen to respond rather than listen to understand."
So that's what it's essentially saying that, and I want to ponder that for a while, because
I
essentially what
know.
we're listening, what happens is when we're listening, oftentimes on autopilot, we're already formulating our response in our head. We're already, rather than being present, rather than actually just being there for what's being said and letting that happen, while the other person is talking, we are already crafting our response. We're already
Correct.
trying to win. It's a win lose situation, and this part of us that always wants to sort of win. It's already
And that
crafting.
and that comes from ego. The whole idea of the win lose comes from the ego rather than, when you learn to tap into that center of mercy, which was what I in that blog post that I had. The idea of mercy to me is learning about universal cooperation, and cooperation does not mean conform. So it's really that really learning to connect on a much deeper level. And imagine what kind of world we would live in for all of us if we would step more into listening to understand rather than listening to respond. I mean, gosh, how many wars could we end?
Absolutely. So, what are some strategies that you have for people to do that,
Well, a lot of it,
or
I
how do you do
start.
it? How do you do it in your own life?
A lot of it does start with the breath work, and really, there are, like, a lot of people who practice matrix. A lot of what I do has been gleaned from so many different methodologies. Not anything in particular, but for instance, like with matrix energetics, one of the practices that they will do is when you take a breath, take a really big deep breath and then hold it for a moment, and then as you exhale, really allow yourself that sense of dropping into the heart center, and you can do it slowly or you can do it quickly, where you just breathe in, hold it, and then even making some sound. Back to the idea of the songs. The whole reason why music is so valuable to us, because sound is vibration, and everything that we experience, it comes from vibration. Everything that
Yeah.
around us has a vibrational force.
Absolutely.
So
As a yoga practitioner in my particular strand of yoga and Kundalini, we do mantras often, and mantras are all about vibration. It's oftentimes it's ancient Sanskrit, or Gurmukhi, which is the oral version of Sanskrit. We'll say a mantra, but it's not
mhm.
necessarily the word that's being said; it's the vibration, and it's
And
you
the
know
intention.
yes, absolutely, both equally important.
Yeah, yeah. So it's the intention too. So that is absolutely another one of the things that people can do is, they can, the breath, the toning, just making some little sound. It's really interesting when you try to when you start a class and you start to give people hints on with breathing techniques, because everything in life, life begins and ends with breath. I mean, that's just logical to me. So we want to start with breath, but it's really interesting when you start to work with people one on one with breath and you tell them to make sound, how like it's almost like they're afraid to let the sound out. And it's as we become more heart centered, we can start to use our own voice as a sounding board. When we start to get to know the ego and drop into the heart, and you can just literally like there's the idea of being the non-emotional observer. And what I mean by that is if you can allow yourself like a moment of a pause or a stillness in between asking questions, you can take a step back from that emotionally charged feeling that keeps us stuck in the past. And when you take that step back, and you can really, I mean, literally ask yourself, when you ask yourself a question, is this coming from my head or is this coming from my heart? Where is my answer coming from? And you can go to your head and ask the question. You can feel your energy move throughout your body. Allow the energy to move throughout your body. So ask the question, from the perspective of the mind, and then ask the question again from the perspective of the heart, and see where you start to get body sensation. Where do you feel it in your body? What does that sensation feel like within the body?
Yeah, that's fantastic. So I love that concept, and I'm curious for people listening out there who some of these concepts might sound a bit abstract or they haven't found the right practice yet to allow them to do that. What are some things that people can do to be more in touch with their body, to be more aware of how they're placing their attention and where they're placing their attention? Do you have any suggestions?
And that's part of it is paying attention, and it's taking that pause. Instead of like we had mentioned earlier about already formulating an answer in our head, it's that groundedness. Like over the weekend, I did a workshop with some people that were really, the questions kept coming up, and you could hear that the questions were starting to come from the brain instead of from the heart and from the body. So it's visualization techniques of when before you go into a meditative state, you can lie down and you can just visualize, taking some strings. There's bands of consciousness. Anybody who knows anything about consciousness, there's bands of consciousness. Everything is energy. So we have energetic connections, energetic bands that attach to people. They talk about cutting the bands. Well, in getting yourself grounded, one of the things you can do is actually like imagine strings, like looking at your body floating over top of the body. And I know this sounds a little bit odd to some people, but if you can allow yourself time to sense that you're not completely in your body, and then taking some strings and like tying your spiritual body into your physical body so that they start to connect.
Yeah.
The whole idea of when people think that stuff like this is weird, I tell them that the definition of weird is supernatural, and I'll take supernatural over mundane any day.
Well, absolutely. And what we're finding is that now science itself is starting to show validity to some of these concepts. They're actually showing, like, for people who say, well, I need proof, I need scientific concept. This is too woo-woo, or this is too new age for me, or whatever vernacular they're using. Now scientists are actually saying, okay, look, we're starting to show how this works. That
string theory.
Absolutely. There's quantum physics. There's areas of neurochemistry and neurobiology. There is brain studies of the brain and how the brain works. All of these things are starting to show, like, look, these concepts aren't so far out there. There's just so much we don't know about how the universe works and about how the human body works. So, and you mentioned this concept of sort of floating, envisioning your body above yourself. Well, if you look at any research studies or case studies of near-death experiences, people always, talk about sort of floating above themselves, having this experience. It's case after case. People mention this when they're talking about NDEs.
And that's a really good point to bring up when it comes to the whole idea of survival. Because when somebody is in survival mode, one of the ways that they lessen the pain is to step out of their body. If they're not really present, then it's not as painful. It's just a survival mechanism to get them through, to whatever trauma they're dealing with or experiencing. What happens though is that even when abuse ends, because they've been conditioned to be out of body for so long, they don't even recognize that they're not present in their body. And really, this is a place where illness can start to occur. And Bernie Siegel, that you had on your show, has always worked with Carolyn Myss. Yeah. And Carolyn is somebody that I learned so much from in her early book called Why People Don't Heal and How They Can. So what's the number one takeaway when you think back to that book and her work? The whole idea of that we make choices before we come here. And it was really, really hard for me to wrap my head around her lesson. And in my book, I talk a lot about some of the things that pissed me off when I started my spiritual journey. Even though, there were things that I would hear people say, so I really had a hard time wrapping my head around Carolyn's whole idea that we make contracts with people before we come here, and that these people that hurt us often really love us and care about us in some other realm of reality, some other spiritual realm, some other dimension, and that, we made these agreements and that they loved us that much to make these agreements. So when you have been abused, I will try not to get too graphic about it on the show here, but when you have experienced something horrific, immoral, something criminal, it's really hard to wrap your head around the idea that that person could have any love for you whatsoever. Since then, I've come to recognize the idea that, since we are spiritual beings having human experiences, that there are other realms and dimensions where the not okays don't exist. Those are concepts that take a while to really ponder and wrap your head around, because it's just too horrific in this third dimension reality that we're illusion, whatever you want to call it, that we're in.
Yeah.
It's really, really hard to fathom those kind of things. And the thing is, when it comes to different types of abuse, it creates so many varying levels, like the whole idea of forgive and forget. Often we're taught just forgive and forget. When you have suffered abuse or trauma, and this also goes, to our soldiers and people suffering from PTSD, it's not that simple. So what happens when you've experienced a trauma is that on something small, some really trivial type of problem, issue, something somebody said that hurt your feelings, it's really easy to forgive and forget. But when you've experienced a deep trauma, it's just not that simple. And it creates these volumes of thoughts in the brain that just really hold you hostage. And they do affect it, absolutely, without a doubt. It's a chemical. There's a chemical reaction occurs too. So, that's when you can't just let go.
Well, that begs the question then, Martha, is it possible to eventually forgive? And if so, how?
It is. And in part, it starts with, in one of the ways that I describe the idea of forgiveness is about us. Instead of forgive, how it's spelled Forgive, I say Forg, and the separate word give. It's for us to give ourselves in advance. Forgive to me means to give ourselves in advance of any stressful situation the right to be at peace. For me, a lot of counselors talk about how we have to learn how to love ourselves. But when you've been abused, you can't start at love because you feel unlovable. And you might not even identify the feeling as being unlovable. So a lot of this has to do with identifying how we feel, and different words resonate differently for different people. So, if you go to counseling and the first thing they tell you is that you need to learn to love yourself, well, you've been so abused and you feel so unlovable that you just think that that's like ridiculous. Love myself. Are you kidding me? So, I say that if we go seek peace, there are times throughout when you want to start, if you've been hurt deeply, and then when you want to start healing, is love an ultimate goal? Is love attainable? Yes. However, if you start with seeking peace, like we can love other people and other things without being at peace. But when you're at peace, love starts to appear in your life more naturally. It starts to flow. It does start to come in. So that idea that, love is, the ultimate thing that we want to experience, what we came here to experience, start with peace and you'll get there.
Yeah, that's great. So Martha, in the book or in your writing in general, how much do you get into the details of your own life situation? How much are you willing to open up and share? And is that difficult for you at this point?
It's really not difficult because I have no shame attached to it at all anymore. Which is,
you've done a lot of work.
I've done a lot of work, and let me tell you, it's been, I'm 55 years old. I'm not embarrassed to say that. I was an adolescent when I was when the sexual abuse started. It started when I was 12 by one brother-in-law, and then another brother-in-law started doing it too until I was about 18 years old. I try not to get too wrapped up in the story part of it. So initially in the book, I really don't give like the details. And that's the thing that I feel separates my book from a lot of books, is that a lot of books about abuse are about the story and what happened. I really take it from a different aspect, and I talk about not the story so much, but the part of the why bothers in the introduction of the book, I have like the 20 questions of why bother. And, some of those giving people reasons why it's important to bother, and why self-help is never stupid, and why it's important to allow themselves to heal and that they can heal. So I talk about the story only from the perspective that it can offer somebody else examples of how they're feeling, offering different words, because different words have energy and vibration too, and different words will resonate differently for different people. So with that said, different words will have a triggering effect for different people, and either trigger them into a past or trigger them into the memory. And sometimes, like, we don't want to be stuck in the past, but sometimes actually exploring the past and embracing, allowing ourselves time to embrace what happened, can put an identification, an identity, a way of identifying for ourselves how we're feeling. If we can allow ourselves to look at it from that perspective of being an observer, and think about how things made us feel in the past, and that we no longer want those. And a lot of it has to do with, okay, this is something I no longer want in my life. I don't like how this makes me feel, and I'm going to make a conscious choice to do everything in my power to change that.
So you're changing the story.
You're not changing the past and you're not changing the story, but you're changing the outcome. You can change the outcome because you don't have to be shackled to that. We are not our past.
Yes. Yeah. And so I guess when I was referring to story, I didn't mean the story of what had happened to you in the past. I mean the story that we all have, these stories now that we carry around with ourselves about, Greg is this, Martha is this. We may, we have these stories about some sort of predisposed tendency or how we feel about things that have happened to us. So it's not necessarily changing the story in the past. It's changing the stories that we carry around with us, the limiting stories at times.
The limitations.
So
absolutely.
maybe I need a different, I need an updated vernacular, a different word for that.
Well, it's okay. And it's funny because when I said about things trigger certain responses, for me, one of the things that, when you go to counseling, one of the first things that they tell you is to stay out of the story. they teach you that, like, you stay out of the story and, go to the feeling. But the problem is then you feel like initially, and again, that's one of the things I talk about in the book, is that sometimes that the things that piss us off when we start our journey. So by telling you not to tell your story, or you feel like your story doesn't have value. So, like for me, it was like I went through this process, like this really tremendously difficult process, like in my head, not being in my heart center, of trying to tell my story without really telling the story.
Yeah, that's true.
So it's really not about not telling the story. It's about not being caught up in the not to trivialize anything, but not to get caught up in the mundane details of our stories.
Yeah, that's really the crucial aspect there. Yeah, indeed.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious, in your biography, I saw that you studied a really wide range of modalities and different things to heal and to move forward in your own life. And one of those was NLP, neuro linguistic
Yes.
programming. And so I'm sure that was in talking about the power that words have, I'm sure that was a very helpful tool for you.
It really, really was. It's really crazy how every modality that I've ever learned has really just been divinely guided. And that whole idea of synchronicity, and I still give credit to Keith Varnum from thedream.com if anybody's interested in his work. He's the one that really empowered me, and he empowers people by letting their souls awaken when their souls are ready. And I learned so much from him, about the whole idea of allowing, and in learning how to just allow things to show up, and the whole idea of attention and awareness. Synchronicities have shown up in my life, and paying attention to when the same message shows up for us from multiple points of view, from multiple sources.
Yeah, and I'm laughing when you say that, because
sometimes
sometimes we need to be sort of whacked over the head a few dozen times until we get the point.
I've heard that expression of the spiritual 2x4, and I love that one.
The spiritual 2x4. I'm not
Yeah.
familiar with that. I do that. That's great.
I thought that was funny. Like when things show up for us synchronistically, and we don't pay attention to them, then suddenly the 2x4 comes out. So NLP absolutely just was one of those things that all of a sudden things just started showing up around me in regards to NLP. And then I saw, voila, there's a class shows up, and I went to that, and I had thought about and pondered the idea of integration a lot before I took that class. But when I took that facilitator training for NLP, the idea of integration really started to sink in on a much deeper level for me, in really the conceptualizing, instead of no longer wronging our head. Because in the early days of New Age, because I do not claim to be New Age in any way, shape, or form. I'm not claiming to be New Age. But a lot of in New Age was about like wronging the head, don't think, come from your heart, don't think. But, the reality is that our thinking process, how do you get into your heart without pondering being in your heart, without thinking about being in your heart, without, noticing things? So, that's why I don't wrong the ego, and I don't wrong the thinking process. And we probably come from a time frame where a lot of times we were taught that our heart can lead us astray, that our heart was wrong. So it's the whole idea of just stop wronging and righting everything. Just,
one part is bad, one part is good. No, that's not healthy.
It's not, because we live in, nothing is one way. Everything goes both directions, and there's value. Looking for the beneficial purpose and the value in everything that presents itself to us. So, when you stop wronging things and allow yourself to integrate your ego and say, yes, that was part of my ego. I get that now, but it was just a lesson. Ego, thank you for showing me that. The offering the appreciation and gratitude to the ego. Thank you for showing me that lesson. Now, but you know what? You did a good job, ego. So you can take a back seat now. Now my authentic self is more empowered. My authentic self is ready to take over. So thank you, ego. You've done a really good job in trying to protect me. but I don't need your protection anymore.
Yeah, yeah. And so I'm curious, and I hope I'm not offending anyone by asking this question. I'm just asking this out of curiosity, but is it possible to see your experiences as a teacher?
To see my experiences as
What you've gone through, what you've learned in this journey that you've been on from abuse into where you are now, is it possible to frame that in any way, or is that? I mean, and again, I was hesitant to even ask that question because I don't want to offend anybody. I'm not in any way meaning to lessen what people have been through.
I think I know where you're going with this, and it is the idea of, can we learn to have an appreciation and gratitude for what happened to us, even though it was horrific?
Yes.
And the way that I express that is that we can learn to accept what happened to us, even though what happened to us was unacceptable.
Unacceptable being the key word.
Right. So even though we can learn to accept, even though these things that still exist in this world are unacceptable, we can find a place, as crazy as it might sound, there is a certain level. Are you grateful that the act happened? No, but can you be grateful for the lesson it gave you? Yes, because it's part of that idea of not taking what happened to us personal and recognizing that some part of us, and this is the difficult part, that some part of us actually chose this lesson before we came here. So that's a really difficult thing for a lot of, but the more that you stick with it, when you hear those things and what you're asking back in the, in the 90s, when I first started this whole journey, hearing Carolyn Myss say that these people love us in another realm of reality, that was a difficult thing to, like, how is that possible?
Yeah.
The thing is that in my experience, I still had to explore all those ideas of then feeling guilty about that, like feeling guilty that I somehow created it. So then there's, we have to start to find ways to forgive ourselves for creating it. There's so many levels when it comes to what we are experiencing here. And as teachers, or, as we really learn to master, there's a couple things that I say about mastery. And one is that mastery doesn't mean there isn't more to learn. It just means the ego no longer fears knowing more. So, the ego no longer fears knowing more. So there's always more to learn, no matter how much we master. And in all the energetic processing that I've done, if you take that one step further, many of us are here. I believe that we all come here no matter how asleep we are, and whether we've chosen to take the red pill, blue pill, Matrix metaphor.
Yeah, I love The Matrix, by the way, one of my favorite movies.
Yeah, so if you take that metaphor, and anybody who doesn't know it can just look it up, on their own later. But, if you take that metaphor, part of that, the thing that we need to remember is those that took the blue pill don't even remember taking the blue pill. So we have to kind of forgive them for taking the blue pill. Those of us that have taken the red pill, we kind of have to take a step back and let go of, trying the expectations of other people to wake up to.
Yeah.
So a lot of it has to do with letting go of expectation. And not that, having expectations on other people, it doesn't mean lowering your standards. You can still maintain your integrity and your standards. And I use the word integrity at least 50 times in the book. And when you think about it, the word integrity, is part of the word integrate.
Yeah, excellent. That's a great tie-in.
So that's something else that we can look at. But the whole thing is for those of us that are gaining some form of mastery, to recognize that, even though we have thought of our ultimate goal as being enlightenment and consciousness, that there's actually something beyond consciousness and enlightenment. There's something else even beyond that. It doesn't end. It goes on.
I love that. We could spend a whole nother hour getting into that realm, but we're flying through our hour here, and there's a couple of crucial concepts that I want to touch upon before we run out of time here. So one of the things you write about, you coined this term, the enchanted champion. What does that mean?
I did, and that is not in the book. It's something that was given to me after. And I'll try to be brief on the whole concept of the heart pillar. It's really powerful for the heart pillar process. I was in the revision process of my book. I was on a particular chapter in my head, stuck in my brain. How am I going to revise this chapter? When I dropped in, did the practice, the breathing practice, closed my eyes, stilled my voice, my internal mind chatter, and I started to hear this voice say, scrap this chapter. I mean, they were literally, the voice was telling me to just delete the whole chapter.
Wow.
And intellectually, I was really struggling with that. Like, what do you mean? I did a lot of work in this chapter, and you want me to, I'm supposed to delete it?
Yeah.
It's a lot of work.
Why?
So I started to pay attention a little bit more, and I was hearing these voices say, we have something better for you. And again, it doesn't matter whether people believe this or not, because I know I could share this at another, like you said, more time at another time on the idea of knowing when you're hearing your own guides and feeling the divine presences around you. We can learn that. It was Archangel Gabriel, if in the male form, but when she's helping people write, she's Gabrielle, and Archangels Raphael. And I allowed them to go ahead and take over, and they offered me this. I went ahead and I hit that delete key on the chapter I was revising, and they gave me the heart pillar, just the introduction, because the book is really, really brief to the introduction of the heart pillar, but they gave me 11 words, and they gave me a process for people to start playing with. And the whole idea of, waking up on your own, that, and not conforming to any one system of belief has to do with play. So they gave me this chapter and this whole concept for people to play with, and it's the heart pillar, and it works with 11 words. And they start with it's about breaking down a lot of feelings, identifying a way to identify feelings by starting on a lower level. Like, you can't really feel gratitude unless you're at some level of appreciation. So we started appreciation. Once we understand and can integrate appreciation into our beingness, then we can step into gratitude. So, and then from gratitude, we can move into grace, and it moves on up. So to answer your question, though, the idea of being an enchanted champion is that came to me because first, we're in victimization mode. We're totally stuck in playing the victim and telling our story over and over again about how bad we've been hurt and how bad we've been wounded. And this is a great place for people to read Carolyn Myss's Why People Don't Heal and How They Can. Great place to start when you're stuck in victimization mode. From victimization, we move into survival. But when you think about the idea, survivor is a step, and it's something to be congratulated for when somebody has survived. But when you think about it, you're still stuck in survival mode, and survival mode is not present. It's fight or flight. So then we move into the warrior mode, where we start to defend other people, learn to defend ourselves. We're a warrior. We can defend ourselves, but we're still stuck in that fight mode. And it still comes with that sense of war and fighting and struggle and disturbances and judgment and hatred and those kinds of things still, when you're in that warrior frame of mind. So the idea of enchanted champion is to step beyond that. And the idea of enchanted is to allow that magic, that innocence that we were born with to start to come back to us, the divinity. To me, the idea of being enchanted is that magical divinity. And champion can be, yes, I've overcome, or yes, now I'm championing a cause, but I can do that from a magical, peaceful perspective.
That is great. Einstein famously said you cannot solve a problem with the same sort of thinking or the same line of thinking from which created the problem. And
what a brilliant.
Yeah, I mean, Einstein was such an amazing dude at so many levels. People think, oh, he's the equal MC squared dude. He was an amazingly philosophical guy, an amazingly spiritual guy.
Absolutely.
quotes that cover the waterfront in every area of life. He was a super genius and a sage. And I love that,
And
he's able to say things like
meditation.
that. Yeah, he was a meditator indeed. So, yeah, I think that really gets to the heart of what you're talking about. You can't solve a problem with the same vibration, the same level of the type of thinking that created the problem. You have to elevate.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's part of why people who have suffered abuse, there are a lot of people who have come through abuse that do not want to inflict the same pain upon someone else that they experience. There are some people, is that cycle of abuse where the abuse becomes the abuser, or they, travel onto another type of abuse. But I think more and more as we are evolving, we're seeing more and more people who were victims stepping into the idea of, I don't want to inflict the same type of pain upon somebody else. So, and I think that's where, culturally it still has a long way to go, but I think we've made some really good progress. And there's a lot of people on this planet today that really want to see things change.
Yeah, it's up to us.
It's up to us. Who else is going to fix it?
Who
There
else?
is nobody
We
else.
can't wait for someone else to solve these problems for humanity. If we don't start, who else is going to do it?
That's right.
Yeah, absolutely. So another really crucial, fun thing we've got to talk about here before we run out of time, Martha, is the rock music lyrics. You've got references to over 80 songs in the book, and you say, knowing that music offers a healing resonance, and the lyrics give voice to those who have not yet found their own, adding an uplifting element to our tumultuous lives, inviting you to find the music, harmony, and vibration of your soul. And I love that you did this. And you actually have a playlist. If you go to your website, which is really cool, you can actually go marthadusage.com. That's DUSAGE, Martha. And you got a sidebar there, and people can actually find your playlist there. Which I thought was really cool. If you go to the About the Book section, there's the playlist. And it's huge. You have links to lyrics, links to the YouTube videos. You could spend a lot of time here on Martha's playlist. And it's fascinating and fun. And I'm going through and I see, classic artists like, the Beatles and John Lennon and Rolling Stones, up to like Bon Jovi and Alice in Chains and the Killers, modern acts, and 80s and 90s acts. I mean, you have an awesome, wide-ranging musical taste there, Martha.
Yes. I can say that I enjoyed putting that together. That was my favorite part of putting the book together. It was creating the playlist. And it gives a double dose of healing, though, because then you get to recognize, you get to connect that it's, when you hear artists putting out words like this, you recognize that you're not alone. And it gives you that courage, that bravery to step out of the shadows and the isolation that, you might experience from being abused. And, it gives you the courage to step out and say, hey, I'm not alone. I'm not the only one that feels this way. So, and again, it's that way. Somebody's not saying this is just Martha, it's not just me, it's not just me saying it. Like, there's a whole world out there that, is there to support you and encourage you. And, the songs, they had a tremendous power for me throughout my lifetime, that connection to music, the sounds, being able to like let yourself, feel the vibration and dance and allow some freedom. But the music playlist does create a very, very interactive experience because, we all have to hear something more than once from different sources before we can integrate it intellectually or spiritually or emotionally, however you want to look at it. We don't always hear something one time and have it stuck into our sense of being forever. It just, there has to be some other way for us to connect, and not everybody connects the same way.
Yeah.
So, allowing that opportunity to connect in different ways, a chord will be struck, strike a chord, find a way to strike a chord to find a tool that works for you, because the same tool doesn't work for everybody.
Yeah, and I love that about your work, Martha, that you have incorporated various modalities. And, it's not a I've got one answer for you approach. You've said, all of these different things worked for me. And you're taking people along on this journey and you're introducing them to different concepts and tools and modalities and all these different things because each of us is going to have our own mix that really resonates with us and that works with us.
And just one further point on that, it's people don't have to just sit down and read the book from beginning to end. It can be an experiential journey, and a lot of people have told me that they're taking it very slowly, like one little section at a time. I have someone who suffered from PTSD from the Gulf War and read the book from cover to cover, but then after that took the book to her counselor to work through different sections of the book with her counselor one-on-one. And she expressed to me, and this is the most gratifying part of writing the book, was that she said that her kids have noticed a difference in her.
Cool. That is great to hear. And so I have to ask you, Martha, I know you mentioned this in your biography that people ask about all the time about the cover. And I love the cover because I'm looking at that saying, whoa, there's a lot going on in there, but it's cool. I mean, it catches your attention and you're like, okay, wow, well, you got a bear and butterflies and, there's a wide mix of stuff in there, Martha. So we have to start with the obvious with the bear.
The bear is, the subtitle is Transform Being Pissed Off, Numb, in Denial, More Emotional into Peace and Passion. And, you mentioned this earlier that, I said that we live in a mad, pissed off world. And all you have to do is interact in the general public and you can see a lot of pissed off people. So, when we've been abused, even if we don't know how to express being pissed off, there is a pissed off, raging bear inside of us. But there's still that goal of wanting that peace, the fulfillment, the love, the joy. So, that bear might be growling. And, we have to recognize that sometimes when people are pissed off, you have to take a step back and say, okay, we don't know what happened in their lives. It's not all about me. I can't take somebody else being pissed off personal. It's not all about me. So those are things that's a very, very, very valuable lesson, the not taking things personally. And it's not all about me. But then, we do, in order for us to heal, sometimes we have to embrace that being pissed off. And I have had people say, thank you for making it okay to be pissed off. But then we can move on to the volcano in the background. And I can say that because things were said to me as a kid, like keep your mouth shut and keep the peace. And there's not a GD. I don't want to use the language, but there's not a darn thing wrong with you that a good crack in the ass won't fix. When I was in my teens and I was begging to go to counseling because I was terrified to tell my parents that, I had been held down by these men and that I was, being sexually abused. Even though I didn't yet identify it as abuse, I knew something was wrong. So in my 30s, when the memories, because I did have repressed and suppressed memories, and they were triggered from going to a workshop on heart-centered counseling. Those memories were not just, they were bubbling below the surface. They were not just low-level disturbances at that point. I was a volcano ready to explode. So when you haven't been raised in a family where communication is encouraged, you don't always know how to express. So in the beginning, with all integrity, I admit that a lot of my communication and expression wasn't really kind. That's something that I really had to work on, is being kind, gentle, and compassionate, with myself and with others.
Yeah, it's part of the journey. You have to go through that.
Right. So then the butterflies are very transformative. That's a traditional, from cocoon to butterfly, the lightness.
Yeah.
And the balloons on the cover can, represent that life can be light, but then they can also have, they have a dual meaning there because, that can represent not being grounded, like how we're floating out of our body and don't even know that we're not present. Because that's what, being out of body is really all about. It's about not being present. And when we're present, we've brought this up before, but it definitely has value in addressing it again. The idea that when we are present, any experiences that we have when we're present are more profound. And I think in some level, we all want more profound experiences. We don't want just the shallowness that sometimes life, comes with, that shallowness. We want something more intimate, profound.
Well, yeah, and I would assume that answers the question, why bother?
Exactly.
You just answered the question you pose on your own book title. You said it right there. That's it. Why bother? That's it. Yeah.
Why bother?
Absolutely. So, Martha, my final question. We're out of time here. We're running a little bit over an hour here, but I have to ask you. I try to ask each one of my guests this. How do you live your life on purpose? What are some concrete, specific things that you do each day to try to be more on purpose with your life?
I do have my own little rituals I have a prayer protection that I say every day when I get up. I have intentions, very clear intentions. It's written in my book, the intention, because my main objective and my intention I'll just do it quickly, is that my intention is to be divinely directly connected to the pure source of whatever it is that I'm seeking, so, I ask to be divinely directly connected to the pure source of love, light, energy, information, knowledge, truth, so I set an intention for that. Setting intentions are very valuable. I have been very into the idea of the holistic approach for years. So I do try to eat more consciously, more organically, more healthy, and, yoga practice at least 5 days a week. When I go out into the world, I actually stop and create that awareness for myself about how I want my energy to project on other people. And I want that projection to be kind. So I always, anywhere I go, no matter, what kind of level that the person that I'm dealing with is at, you can't go too far above, because there's levels of awareness and consciousness in projecting your energy. If you're too far above somebody or too far below, you're not going to resonate. But, whatever I do, I just try to offer some form of kindness.
Yeah. Well, that's excellent. And that is living your life on purpose right there. So I commend you for that, Martha. And I just want to thank you for your time and your wisdom and your expertise in sharing your story with the world via the book and via interviews like this. And I think it's really crucial that people have these conversations. And as you mentioned right up front, sometimes they are difficult to have, but it's really, if we're going to move forward as a human race, we've got to deal with some of these things. We've got to bring them to light, and we've got to be able to have difficult conversations. And so I just want to thank you for all the work that you do, Martha.
And thank you. I appreciate the opportunity here.
Excellent. And if you like what we're talking about here, folks, on Life on Purpose, we're here every week doing this. LifeOnPurposeShow.com is the website. You can learn more about that. We generally do about an episode a week we put out on the show. You can listen on iTunes. We'd love a review there, by the way, or the Stitcher Radio app, the Apple Podcast app. All of those places you can subscribe or download or pull up at your convenience anytime. We'd love to have you back, so check us out again. It's Life on Purpose. I'm your host, Greg Berg. Until next week, take care.